Godzilla has been an icon around the world for nearly 70 years, a distinctly Japanese creation that grew to become a beloved hero worldwide. But while Godzilla was created as a metaphor for the atomic bombing of Japan and the devastation felt by an entire nation after World War II, the King of the Monsters has continuously transformed into an avatar for many different ideas as the years go by. Today, nearly 70 years after Ishiro Honda's original Gojira premiered, we can see just how much Godzilla has changed, flipping back and forth between hero and villain, savior and destroyer of Japan, raging monster and charming friend. But this constant change has been present ever since Godzilla's earliest days at Toho Studios. Under the guidance of Honda and the need for a broader appealing, friendlier monster that could appeal to all ages and compete in an era when TV was steadily cutting into film profits, Godzilla changed from being the avatar of Japan's destruction to the avatar of Japan itself. In retrospect, all of these interpretations, complete with multiple reboots, conflicting origins, and constant changes between hero and villain, have informed the greater meaning of Godzilla. And while Godzilla has evolved across 4 distinct periods, Showa, Heisei, Millennium, and now Reiwa, the foundations of the monster will always be in the original Showa period, stretching from 1953 through 1975, and encompassing the first 15 Godzilla films. Here we'll explore the entirety of Showa Gojira, from the creature's terrifying nuclear debut to its final stumbles that led to its inevitable rebirth. And in this constant evolution, we can see how a nation not only processes, but reclaims its greatest fears, and turns them into eternal strengths. In 1953, audiences trembled in fear when an atomic bomb awakened a gigantic creature whose rampage destroyed everything in its path. But it wasn't Godzilla, it was the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, based on a Ray Bradbury short story and a precursor of the modern Kaiju film. And its success inspired Toho producer Tomoyuki Tanaka's idea to capitalize on the rising popularity of monster movies. Tanaka soon hired sci-fi writer Shigeru Kayama to write a story for his proposed film, and this 50-page plot was eventually heavily rewritten by Takeo Murata and the man hired to direct the upcoming monster movie, Ishiro Honda. But Murata and Honda weren't satisfied with simply creating the latest creature feature, but instead wanted to process Japanese fears of nuclear apocalypse. The film that resulted, Gojira, can be seen today as a window into a nation's past. But at the time of its release, it hadn't even been a decade since the United States dropped nuclear bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and 9th in 1945. Killing at least 100,000 people and critically wounding hundreds of thousands more at the end of World War II. The destruction left a permanent mark on Honda's worldview, who at the time of the bombing was serving as a soldier. "When I was coming back from the war, we passed through Hiroshima," Honda said. "Back then, it was said that for the next 72 years, not a single blade of grass would grow there, and that really stayed with me. So I have a kind of hatred of nuclear weapons. It's horrifying to make such weapons and use them on one city and then another. It was that feeling, for me as a director, that meant I didn't hesitate one bit to make Godzilla come alive in the film." In the wake of the country's surrender, Japan was occupied by American forces until 1952, which enforced heavy censorship on the country, including a ban on all open discussion of the atomic bomb. The result is that a movie like Gojira could only be made once the ban was lifted, and became one of the first films to directly comment on nuclear warfare. And Gojira makes its nuclear metaphors clear even for the least informed of viewers. The presence of Gojira is at first a mystery, but its nuclear aftermath directly evokes the bomb, causing its lead characters to discuss the losses suffered by Japan. As for the monster itself, Gojira's skin was not only designed to mimic the look of keloid radiation scars, but the effects of the monster, blinding flash, massive destruction, radiation burns, directly mimic a nuclear bomb. Godzilla's mysterious rise from the ocean and destruction of a fishing boat mimics the real-life incident of the Daigo Fukuryu Maro, a Japanese fishing boat whose crew was irradiated by a US nuclear bomb test in 1954. At 165 feet tall, a height that would only increase with each coming decade to keep pace with increasingly tall cityscapes, Godzilla is theorized to be an ancient creature that was peacefully living in an undersea cave, destroyed by repeated H-bomb testing, forcing it to come to land. But Godzilla's arrival causes the government to fear that their diplomatic relations with the US will be fully destroyed if it's revealed that Godzilla is the result of atomic tests. So Godzilla is both a metaphor for the US's atomic attack, and its role in the film is informed by Japan's real-world relationship with the US actually happening at the time. And Godzilla's continued path of destruction through Japan without explanation to the public is the direct reflection of that recent American nuclear censorship. Here, in his first appearance, Godzilla is very much a disruption of nature, something great and terrible that should have never been awakened, but was brought upon Japan because of humankind's destructive nature. And so the only thing that can kill it is another perversion of nature, Dr. Serizawa's oxygen destroyer device, a weapon that makes the atomic bomb seem tiny in comparison. To keep such a weapon from ever falling in the wrong hands, Serizawa sacrifices himself to destroy Godzilla. It can be easy to define the Godzilla series as being made up of fun battles and enjoyable destruction, but Gojira is largely composed of quiet, sad scenes, focused on humans either trying to understand Godzilla or suffering from its destruction. The box office success of Gojira led to executive producer Iwao Mori greenlighting a sequel almost immediately, and because he wanted to ride the wave of the original, Mori hired Motoyoshi Oda to direct what would become Godzilla Raids Again, instead of waiting for Honda to finish the film he was then currently directing. The result sees Godzilla return without explanation, and really, this movie doesn't have much of a plot. You can tell because several minutes are spent watching an in-film highlight reel of the first. Even back in the 50s, franchises were suffering the effects of rushing out sequels to their successful properties. Godzilla Raids Again has been seen by some as a metaphor for the bombing of Nagasaki, with Godzilla returning and accompanied by the equally destructive Anguirus. And while the political and social commentary is not nearly as present within the second film, the return of an incredibly destructive force that was thought to be a once-in-a-lifetime tragedy plays well within this metaphor. The original Gojira would be heavily edited, dubbed, and have actor Raymond Burr added for its US premiere, leading to the Americanized name of Godzilla in 1956. But after his burial in ice at the end of Raids Again, Godzilla would lay dormant for 7 years, only to be resuscitated by what was once an anomaly in this franchise, but is now more relevant than ever, 1962's King Kong vs. Godzilla. But the return of Godzilla wasn't sparked by Toho's desire to bring the King of the Monsters back. Instead, it was their eagerness to make a King Kong film. The original Kong vs. Godzilla was based on an idea by King Kong stop-motion animator Willis O'Brien that originally pitted Kong against a gigantic version of Frankenstein's monster. Even now, that idea is a little ridiculous. But the idea was sold to Toho by producer John Beck behind O'Brien's back after he learned of Toho's desire to make a Kong movie. O'Brien wasn't happy. Eventually, the role of Frankenstein's monster was replaced by Godzilla because Toho incorrectly believed that Universal Studios held the rights to Frankenstein. And voila, you get King Kong vs. Godzilla. It's, underwhelming. But it's here where we start to see some of the elements that would come to define the rest of the Showa era. Not only is King Kong vs. Godzilla the first color and widescreen appearance of both these characters, but it also begins to incorporate the comedy that would define much of the following films, and was the first to truly be centered around the clash of creatures. Yes, Anguirus fought Godzilla in this franchise's second film, but this was the first film to be entirely sold on its title battle. The film was also a massive hit, by some estimates still holding the record for the most attended Godzilla film in Japan, and the success jump-started the rest of the Showa era, which would then produce an average of one Godzilla film every year until 1975. While Godzilla is primarily known as a hero today, Goji's first 4 films portray the monster as a villain, or at least the disastrous obstacle that its human characters need to overcome. The Godzilla of the early Showa days is an unfeeling force of destruction whose mindless rampage is contrasted against the humans struggling to survive, the more empathetic Kong, and the majestic Mothra. In pro wrestling terms, Godzilla was a heel, but his face turn would come in 1964's Ghidorah, the Three-Headed Monster, which introduced the space invader who became Godzilla's career-long rival. It's not a coincidence that it took King Ghidorah to turn Godzilla into an anti-hero. Ghidorah is the first alien enemy of the franchise, and by being an extraterrestrial invader, Godzilla is made into a defender of the Earth. To some degree, every Godzilla movie movie is nationalistic, showing pride in Japan's ability to come together to fight off invading threats. But by making Ghidorah and future enemies like Hedorah, Gigan, Megalon, and Mechagodzilla into invaders of Godzilla's domain, the king of the monsters himself becomes a nationalistic symbol. Along with these changes comes a different fate for Godzilla at the end of each movie. Instead of the humans needing some way to kill or imprison Godzilla, the monster, along with any other creatures he's teamed up with, go dormant or simply leave after the battle is over. Now, Godzilla had become the hero of Japan, fighting against the worst threats to the nation, and often teaming up with the monsters he had fought to the death only a few films earlier. The Showa Godzilla series had quickly become a monster mash, with Ghidorah, Invasion of Astro Monster, and Ibira, Horror of the Deep, all starring multiple monsters in brighter, lighter fights that reflected less and less of the real-world problems faced by Japan at the time. There are, however, still changing reflections of Japan to be found in these films, with each tweaking the role of Godzilla and his relationship to Japan in response. The Showa era can be split into three sections: the original duology, the revival series, and the champion series, with each progressing the heroism of our main kaiju. Ghidorah and Invasion turned Godzilla into a reluctant hero, more coerced into fighting for the world than truly wanting to defend it. Ibira and Son of Godzilla turned Goji into a straightforward hero by entirely taking place on islands, having the kaiju fight both giant monsters and environmentally destructive humans, and avoiding causing any urban destruction, also due to budget cuts. Both of these are directed by Jun Fukuda, who would direct 5 Showa-era Godzilla films and often embraced a lighter, more action-packed approach to kaiju stories. Afterward, Destroy All Monsters would pack its runtime with as many kaiju as possible for bigger action and hopefully bigger audiences, in what was originally intended to be the franchise finale. This would all lead to the Showa era's final 6-film run, which is largely propelled by Godzilla independently arriving to protect Japan from invading monsters without the need for coercion, and even talking in speech bubbles one time. These movies were specifically produced as features for the Toho Champion Festival Children's Matinee program. As such, they generally have a lighter, less apocalyptic tone, although you couldn't tell that by the dark psychedelic pollution warning that is Godzilla vs. Hedorah. Each of these movies also allows for some continuity to inform Godzilla's place in the world and his relationship to fellow kaiju. Often, a character whose film was financially successful, like Mothra, Ghidorah, or Mechagodzilla, will immediately return in the next movie to try and bring back audiences. It's long-form storytelling without any real ongoing story. But through all of these ups and downs, tonal shifts, and budget cuts, the evolution of Godzilla was shepherded by Ishiro Honda. Before his film career, Honda served 3 tours in Japan's Imperial Army and was taken prisoner by China during World War II. But the experience shaped Honda into someone who was staunchly anti-war, and you can see Honda's beliefs shape the Showa era of Godzilla, even as it embraced a silliness and kid-friendly nature mandated by the studio that Honda disagreed with. The co-creator of Godzilla was fervently humanist and passionate about science and nature. While the Godzilla films would take these ideas to silly degrees of extremity, there is a consistent focus on the importance of caring for your fellow man. Science consistently plays a role in understanding and defeating the monstrous threats to Japan, and while Godzilla and his fellow kaiju wreak havoc, there's also a sense of wonder and fascination to them. In the Showa era, kaiju are prehistoric beings that ruled the planet long before humanity, and it's humanity's destructive nature that has reawakened them. Their existence changes the context of humankind's power and rule over the earth in deference to the might of Godzilla. In the context of the original Gojira, Honda's humanism is found through the film's firmly anti-nuclear lens, and Godzilla's status as a walking atomic bomb, with Japan needing to come together to prevent another catastrophe. But as Godzilla evolved into a hero, Honda's humanism comes in the form of Godzilla itself, who is now a walking personification of Japan. Godzilla becomes far more anthropomorphized. The destruction it causes no longer has a direct human casualty rate involved, and the silliness of these battles becomes much more intentional. International cooperation also becomes a running theme throughout the Godzilla series, especially in films directed by Honda. These films have a primarily Japanese cast and crew, but space invader kaiju threaten the entire planet, uniting Earth against these intergalactic threats. 1968's Destroy All Monsters might be the ultimate encapsulation of Honda's focus on international cooperation. Set at the vague end of the 20th century, Destroy All Monsters sees Earth having reached world peace, and even given given the kaiju their own piece on the secluded monster island. That piece is shattered when an alien race mind controls the kaiju into a global rampage. But humanity's unity prevails in the end, mostly by freeing Godzilla and company and watching them curb stomp King Ghidorah. But by having the film set during what was then the distant future, Honda envisions a peaceful, cooperative destiny for man and monster. Of course, we can't discuss Godzilla without talking about the costumes and fights, and it's a strange, joyous sensation that straddles the line of camp cheese and complete earnestness that propels these monster mashes. These are, of course, men in rubber suits fighting across miniaturized landscapes. But once you buy into the concept, with the Showa era probably needing the greatest suspension of disbelief of all the eras of Godzilla, you stop seeing the costume seams and flying wires, and instead see the fun of these dialogue-free, sloppy ballet meets wrestling matches that are the centerpiece of these movies. Of course, every Showa Godzilla movie introduces a set of human characters who discover the villainous plot, fight to stop the forces of evil, and cheer on Godzilla at the climax, typically never to be seen again after the movie ends. But Honda, Fukuda, and company are content to let their climactic action play out for lengthy stretches of time without a single spoken word. Each of these battles gives Toho the chance to introduce another strange threat to Earth, and some are instant classics. That lightning bolt spamming King Ghidorah and my favorite intergalactic scumbum Gigan specifically, and others are spectacular failures. The wildly boring Kamacuras, the embarrassing Megalon. But it's a testament to Toho's costume design that so many of these creatures are burned into the public consciousness, and none more so than the ever-changing Godzilla. Godzilla's suit design morphed many times throughout these films, with the costume often being rebuilt from scratch between films due to disrepair or heavily modified to replace damaged parts. And while there's a commitment to keeping Godzilla's general design intact, the interpretations vary widely, with some being outright silly and others being downright ugly. Musuko Goji. Stinky. As Godzilla slowly became an outright hero, his designs became friendlier and goofier looking, with continued budget cuts also affecting the quality of these designs. For example, the Mosu Goji suit was only used in 2 films made in 1964, Godzilla vs. Mothra and Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, with its heavy brows, sharp claws, and thick scales evoking the original film's design but with a more mobile, flexible appearance. On the other hand, the Soshingeki Goji suit was used in 4 movies from 1968 through 1972, with little repairs in between film shoots. The result is a strong design that shows visible wear and tear by its final appearance. And it's no wonder these suits broke down during filming. The actors inside would throw themselves across sets, smash into each other, and regularly be engulfed in explosions. But there's a platonic Showa ideal reached when all of these suits are combined, creating a classic humanoid, slightly friendly king of the monsters, in comparison to his much fiercer later incarnations. To match Godzilla's rise to hero status, Honda and company make increasingly wild story decisions as the franchise continues. There's not just more and more monsters to fight, but alien invasions, magic, the son of Godzilla known as Manila, ancient undersea civilizations, the deadly Mechagodzilla, and maybe most importantly to the latter half of this era, a focus on making the movies kid-friendly. And no film illustrates the collision of chop budgets and kid appeal better than 1969's All Monsters Attack. Barely over an hour and chock full of reused footage to tell the story of a young boy overcoming bullies with the help of Goji and a now talking Manila in his dreams. The sight of lonely Ichiro and friendly Manila having an island adventure is a far cry from the stoic tragedy of Honda's original film, but that's what makes the Showa era so fascinating. Honda himself, who directed 8 of these 15 films, was always dead serious about kaiju and was staunchly committed to the ideas on display. But Toho decided that as the burgeoning TV market began to cut into film profits, Godzilla's adventures needed to appeal more to kids and teenage date nights. The fights are longer, the plot simpler, the footage often reused from previous movies, and the threats broader. Strangely, these movies also get bloodier, with Godzilla gushing like a Tarantino film in the climax of Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. Terror of Mechagodzilla would be the final film of the Showa era, with Honda returning to the director's chair, only for the film to be a box office bomb. It remains the lowest grossing Godzilla film of all time in Japan, and the failure put the franchise, already on thin ice at Toho due to decreasing profits, on the back burner. While it wasn't for lack of trying, Godzilla wouldn't come back to the big screen until 1984's The Return of Godzilla, the start of the Heisei era and a more modern, bigger, darker incarnation of Godzilla. The Showa era of Godzilla was over. Terror would also be Ishiro Honda's final film as a director, with the now 64-year-old filmmaker retiring until he was coaxed by close friend Akira Kurosawa into becoming his second unit director. Together, the two veteran filmmakers would make Kurosawa's final 5 films together until Honda's death in 1993. A quiet end to the career of a man who shaped decades of international pop culture. As I watched every Showa Era Godzilla film in order, I came to the realization that these films are the ultimate intersection between mainstream blockbuster and scrappy indie production. With a new film being made every year and budgets getting slimmer and slimmer, Honda, Fukuda and company would need to crank out a successful film immediately based on the success or failure of the movie that just premiered. And the seams and cracks in production are more visible than ever in the modern age of high-def resolution. But in any case, Toho's Showa Era Productions turned Godzilla into a massive Japanese pop culture icon and a cult classic overseas. The decades that followed would build upon these crazy, colorful, scrappy films with bigger budgets and modern social commentary, creating a constantly evolving king of the monsters that has managed to remain relevant as our world and its worst fears continue to change. And finally, here's my personal ranking of all 15 Showa Era Godzilla films, from worst to best. At 15, Godzilla vs. Megalon, a movie that was supposed to be a vehicle for new tokusatsu hero Jet Jaguar, but became a Godzilla movie when Toho lost confidence. This one has big, forgot they were making a movie energy. At 14, All Monsters Attack, a movie meant to create a positive message for kids, but something that feels completely strange and redundant in the larger series. This one really doesn't work well when watching all of these movies in a short span of time. At 13, Son of Godzilla, the full turn into family-friendly Goji and all the silliness that you would expect from that. It's a very slow movie, but there is a scene where Godzilla teaches Manila to use his atomic breath, and it rules. At 12, King Kong vs. Godzilla. This one is loved by a lot of people, but to me, it suffers from the tonal whiplash of moving from the initial duology to the revival. Plus, these fights are the messiest in the entire series. At 11, Godzilla vs. Hedorah, a truly wild piece of societal commentary critiquing Japan's massive pollution problem while also having buku 70s flair. The film ends with a hint at another Hedorah movie, but writer-director Yoshimitsu Banno was banned from ever making another Godzilla movie by producer Tomoyuki Tanaka, who thought he had ruined the entire series. At 10, Godzilla Raids Again, a film that retains much of the original's gravitas, but never lives up to the first, especially since its sobering real-world metaphors have already been somewhat left behind. At 9, Invasion of Astro Monster. This is Showa Godzilla going full-on weirdo. It hits the ground running and, of course, features Goji's celebratory hop dance, but then it kinda comes to a halt while our heroes figure out the nefarious plans that could destroy Earth. At 8, Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, the true pivot into monster mashing and a lot of fun, along with Godzilla's anti-hero turn. This is really where the fun Showa Godzilla is formed, and Ghidorah is rightfully cemented as the lasting big bad of the franchise. At 7, Terror of Mechagodzilla, the final Showa film and a darker story than most here. The returning Honda brings gravitas to a tragic victory and sympathetic villain. There's also Titanosaurus, I guess. At 6, Mothra vs. Godzilla, the last villainous Goji movie and the one that brings in Mothra, who will be the consistent positive force against Godzilla's changing status quo. We stan an unproblematic queen. At 5, Godzilla vs. Gigan. One of the darker films in the era, Gigan is a true threat to Godzilla, and their deadly battle provides greater stakes to another alien invasion plot. Godzilla bleeds for the first time and it's surprisingly effective. At 4, Ibira, Horror of the Deep. A less discussed entry, but a super fun story where the human characters actually have an interesting adventure. Bonus points for its tropical setting and focused story. At 3, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. Here, Godzilla fights an evil robot version of himself, and the result is just as good as that sounds, with Mechagodzilla providing new technological challenges to the king of the monsters. King Caesar is also here, I guess. At 2, Destroy All Monsters. A lean, all-out monster mash that delivers on the promise you were expecting. Like many of these movies, the second act is way too slow, but the finale makes up for it with its team-up brawl. And at number 1, Ishiro Honda's original Gojira, the film that started it all and a story that is still able to haunt through its metaphors. It's no wonder that a decades-long franchise was born from this film, because Godzilla and his world are at their most potent here. And with that, we've come to the end of Godzilla's Showa era, a strange, colorful, foundational period for Godzilla, but far from the last we'd see of the king of the monsters. Thanks for watching today's video. I've been wanting to talk about more Godzilla ever since I covered the Half-Century War comic, and also since talking about Godzilla in my creature feature video last year. And with Kong vs. Godzilla coming out soon at the debut of this video, I felt it was the perfect time to cover more of the King of the Monsters. And my desire to go through every Godzilla movie had me start with the Showa era, and I think it's a really fascinating stretch of films to talk about. I'd also like to do videos on the Heisei and Millennium eras as well, and a video just about Shin Godzilla, but how soon I cover those topics depends on how well this video performs. So if you'd like to see more Godzilla videos, please click like, share the video, and comment below. It'll really help the performance of this video. But in any case, I had a blast going through the entire Showa era, and I hope you enjoyed it too. And it was also fun doing a ranking of the films as well. If you have your own ranking of Showa Godzilla movies, please comment down below with your own personal ranking. I would also like to continue the ranking for each of the following eras, and eventually rank all of the eras and all of the movies combined. So look forward to that in the eventual coming Godzilla videos. As always, thank you to my patrons for their continued support into the new year. I'd like to get some more Patreon exclusive content up pretty soon to reward everyone for their continued support. Life's been a little hectic lately, which is why my production schedule is sort of slowing down, but there's plenty more videos to come, so look forward to that. As always, I hope that you're taking care of yourself, staying safe, and looking out for one another. Oh, and as far as Kong vs. Godzilla goes, Team Godzilla. See you again soon.